Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for being able to talk with you. Um, the distance is a bit large, so I hope everything works well. And I hope you are all well and have no problems with the current situation. We will talk about industrial transition and the question, where do we want to go? Industry 4.0 has created a lot of attention. And we need to check what direction is given by that. A few words to myself in the beginning. I worked for Festo, which is an independent family enterprise, which is important because a family enterprise cares for its employees in a different way than just a public noted company. I worked there for many years as head of the Department for Future Technology, so I was allowed to work on many interesting technological features, our customers being everywhere in industry. Can you all hear me all right?
Yeah, I
Okay,
hear you. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. I tried to find an idea to understand transition in a better way. If we talk about industrial transition, do we think that Industry 4.0 is such a transition? In our discussions, we use this picture many times, indicating that everything is linked to everything autonomously, opening up new ways and procedures for production, for designing products and so forth. I think it's a very happy coincidence that exactly on this day 30 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee put his first website online. So it's just 30 years ago. These technologies opened this world, and we need to reflect what is our expectation for transition, what time scales, effort, and devices and softwares and so forth are needed. What can you expect? I would like to talk a bit about transition, check the goal we have in mind, include sustainability convincingly. I think this is important in link to your seminar, challenge our strategies, why ethics are important, and how we will move forward. I tried to find an idea to make transition more obvious. Suppose you sit under this tree and suddenly an apple falls down. The very second this apple falls, you recognize that this small apple attracts the big earth under you as much as the earth attracts the apple. Of course, we are talking about Newton's garden, and what it makes clear is after that transition, within a twinkling of an eye, so to speak, even though he may have thought a little longer about it, mechanics and everything else was not the same as before. So this transition took place on a very short time scale. If we go to the transition related to Industry 4.0, we need to recognize two important things. Industry 4.0 is the brand name for a new technology that is to be applied in industrial environment. While before Industry 4.0 was introduced, it was very difficult to address production technology and work on devices and technologies that are related to that, because there was a picture, production is dirty and old, number one, and B, it is not worth working on it in Europe because has gone anyhow. There have been many ideas on this along the way, and I would like to draw your attention to a European project. KTH was the coordinator at the time. And the fascinating ideas for me, and this led my work in my research at industry for a long time, was a so-called click trick. You make devices with interfaces and a software backbone which enable you to click these devices to your production line. Once the device is clicked to the line is operable. And not only this, but all this happens in the background while you design your product, and you have the assembly line generated automatically in the backbone, in the back. This is, of course, a myth, but it is a leading idea, and you can find it in many different forms throughout research, say the last 15 years, where people worked on in principle on devices like this, a device including mechanics, actuation, sensors, and electronics, all miniaturized so that you can easily connect it to a system. It has all this integrated. The user does not have to worry about it. It has standardized interfaces, and it has a software system which allows to build complicated machines. These universal building blocks, you have seen them, you probably have worked on it, and you see projects throughout Europe over the last decade. Why is this so important? At the time, we talked to system integrators. System integrators are the people that build the production line for Volvo, for Daimler, for name it. And they all agreed in principle on this kind of project description when they build a line. 10% is management of the cost, 25% mechanical parts for generating the line, and 15% of control. We do not talk about 1% here back and forth, but in principle, this is the situation. And this is the equipment side of the project. On the other side, you have the building, and the building, and this is our area of interest, includes 30% mechanics, the actual physical building of the line, and 20% of testing and ramping up. And these two things together are the point of attack for ideas like Industry 4.0, because if you have integrated devices with good interfaces, you can reduce the mechanical building, and you can reduce the ramping up dramatically. So if you have a new line, it usually takes weeks until everything is working. If you have a running line and want to replace something, again, it takes days to weeks to readjust the sensors and softwares. And if you have a system that brings this down, you have a big advantage. This is the reason for the integrated general devices. If we talk about transition, we need to understand not only the idea, why we want to transit, but also we can look to history for real success stories, and they can teach us a lot. I've taken the one from Ford Model T. It was first presented in 1908. It was built until 1927 with 15 million cars sold, an all-time record until the VW Beagle came into existence. And the development of the line is comparable to the transition we are talking here, because in the first place, 47 days were necessary to build one car. When the line was operating with Taylor principles and moving to be assembled car along the line and so forth, it was brought down to 95 minutes. And you can guess what kind of revolutionary technology had to be in the back in order to enable that. But note, it took 19 years. And Industry 4.0 is also on a long time scale. It has also to be noted that Ford was not on profit maximization. He wanted to use the best materials, best men hired, simplest design to build an affordable car. This is different from we have a manufacturing enterprise, and our goal is to maximize the profit. And it is also worth noting that personalities like Ford throughout industrial history, in my understanding, need to be studied, because they were not only very good engineers, but they they had points in their life where they put all their fortune on stake just to carry on with their idea. So their mental attitude is something we can learn from. Number two, if you want to make an industrial transition, you will very likely face the following problem. Um, Here I've taken arbitrary devices. So one for 100 euros a part and one for 0.1 euro a part. And I want to make their assembly or production at least partially automated. And I take certain amounts of money, allow for a 5-year depletion, and find out what is the influence of the invest on the making of the product in terms of end price. And you can see if you take 50,000 euros, the 100 euro part has a 10 euro margin for just this investment and so forth. And you can also calculate if you have 5 million euros, the 1 euro part, even you have a volume of 1 million a year, has 1 euro extra on price to be built. And if you know what your devices in the laboratory are costing, you can see that we are not talking about horrible big sums here. And we need to understand how do we generate or how do we argue the money to be invested to make this industrial transition up here. First bullet point, industrial transition into a prosperous future challenges us to understand the timescales involved. We talk rather tens of years than years. I have a good friend who is working or did work in automotive and production technology development. And he said, if you have a good technology you want it to introduce into the line, it will be effective in 8 years when the next model is running, because before that time, the production manager will not allow you to do anything to his line. So we have also to have a balanced view on how to finance the transition. We cannot just dream of Industry 4.0, but we need to see the costs involved. And we need to be specific on what we will replace. Industry 4.0 kind of had the image of kicking out everything else which was before and making a completely new line. If you're able to do this, fine, but usually you have to take care of legacy components, and this needs a lot of software requirements, hardware adjustment, and so forth. You need to understand when you work on that, how to do that. As scientists, in my view, we are challenged to think scientifically as far to an end as we can. And this means we need to develop images in our mind which guide our work. So in terms of production, we may come from the 1930s, the moving line of Ford, which was an innovation at that time, to a sophisticated line of today. And the transition may mean to go over there to that, have a completely automated factory out in the green, things rolling to the factory automatically, and the products brought to the customer automatically. If you check the scientific discussions you see, you will meet this kind of image very often. And we have to question whether this is the correct image, because do you see any people here? No, you don't see any people here. We tend to think that technology removes people efficiently so that the technology can work autonomously. And the question is whether this is a good goal and whether this will be, in view of your seminar, sustainable for our future. What is the future of the enterprise? And the provocation is the future board 5 robots sitting at desk governing the institution? Is this fantasy, vision of the future, or economic necessity? And at what level do machines replace humans? I've chosen the board to make clear that this will hit every position in the board and that there are not a few people that can lean back, kick out others, and have a good enterprise running. And the workplace of tomorrow, is this walking along the beach? And how do we understand their work? And how do we pay for the income? And if I say we need to think to the end, we have to balance these two things, and we have to find models for value creation that keep these people in a situation that they can make a living. As a result of that, is enterprise of the future, one which has only some owners and some managers and almost no personnel underneath. You may have some services on the low level with no social security, no retirement fund, and no health care service. Let us be very serious about that. Also today, we see enterprises working on that in the service area. I could name you several in Germany immediately. And if you look over to Lufthansa, the A380 at the moment, due to the crisis, is grounded. They had chosen the best of their pilots to fly these complex machines. They are now walking along the beach. So the times we are moving in are requesting us to think seriously on how to move forward so that we keep people on board and that we not only maximize profit. This is why I believe, second bullet point, we need to include sustainability convincingly. We cannot just talk about it, we need to find measures on how to make it work. Sustainability has the three features, ecologic, economic, and social. The ecological side is more or less worked on, even though the climate change is, of course, a big question. The economical side is not really taken care of because profit maximization leads to limiting to others. And the social sustainability is left to the state in terms of social security, but we don't develop models, or we rarely develop models where we include the society in the value creation process in such a broad form that everyone has a decent way of living. Reality check, yes, ecological, yes, economy and social, not really. It has to be mentioned, to be honest, that Industry 4.0 agrees on 4 dimensions. So 3 technical and 1 human-centered. And it is said, yes, we have skills, knowledge training, and we need the orchestration, and this is left to the human, and we need him very seriously. I believe that this is the case, but we have to be very sure that this is not lip service or a fig leaf for very detrimental actions. And we need to describe this in detail. We cannot just say, oh yes, there will be jobs, and not describe them and make a serious effort to create that job. Nevertheless, there is an interesting argument by Piketty. Piketty has written The Capital of the 21st Century, describing the development of fortunes over the last 200-300 years based on tax information and so forth. And he has a very interesting point. The point is, if you assume a 1% increase of the world production per inhabitant per year, so an increase of 1%, this leads economically to a renewal of society within 30 years, which means 1 generation. And this means accumulated growth of 35%, huge growth. And you can compare 1980 to 2010, no internet, no mobile, and so forth. You can see that easily. And you can also see easily that to achieve this change here, you need many new jobs and new professions. So yes, over this period of time, we also had a change in the workforce, and we kept saying, oh, don't worry, yes, we stopped this, but we have more. This was true. Um, Still, this process may be very painful for the individual who's not foreseen to be part of that transition. And what makes things um, skeptical or difficult is that we observe today that the difference between these new jobs generated and the people left out is widening. So just 2 days ago on the news, we had that every 10th adult in Germany is likely not to be able to pay his debts permanently. So where do they get the income from, and how do we keep them? Baseline of all this discussion is a curve like this. It shows the income distribution, a principal income distribution between low income and high income. You will find this curve for any country, for any company. In principle, it looks like this. The absolute value here, of course, varies very much. But in all cases, you can see that the upper percent or upper per mil of this distribution gains much more of the share of income than the rest of the game. This leads very quickly to ethical questions. For instance, if you take big companies in Germany, the CEO of the board earns 100 times more than the normal worker. And you try to convince me that this can be justified in any form of his work quality. If you have such a curve, it is interesting to see that you can calculate it analytically, and then you can start to play around with numbers. And you can see if you decrease the value on the top a bit, not by factors, a bit, the lower part and the middle class is winning dramatically or tremendously. You can study that in the US at the moment. You will see that this mechanism is working. And this leads us to the ethics behind that as a question. My interest toward the end of my professional career was this one. We had a European project called So Smart, and it was addressing the question whether this little yellow guy up here has a chance to make a sustainable living case for himself or for herself in the surrounding society and in the surrounding business world. It is easy to be seen that if this is non-democratic or dictatorial, forget about his sustainability. If the business side takes out every cent and maximizes the profit only for a few, he has no luck either. So are there ways to do this, or is this a lost game? We found that it is not a lost game. We have to understand the ethics as an economic and social necessity, and not just a nice attribute. We have to challenge our concept of value creation. This is behind the question how to redistribute value in the curve we just discussed. And this will not happen overnight. We need to start research for social sustainable balance, which is directly linked to your seminar and your work. And it contains a suggestion to rethink automation and factory organization, which started with Industry 4.0, but Industry 4.0 remains at the level of technology, basically, and it does not really put the question how to employ that technology to get more people involved in the working process. The concept is in principle this: you have the individual case, you have the society case and the business case. The individual case has a certain interest to get his scale in balance. The society usually has to balance on his side in order that the business side is balanced accordingly. I am not talking about a revolution. I'm talking about that this is economically possible. It is not possible if profit maximization is a scale for all things involved. Let's go back for this for a short moment. Technology interlinking everything autonomously. I realized some time ago that this picture does not contain the human. It just talks about Internet of Things, software programs, and so forth. And we need to ask ourselves if this is a change, if this is to change our industrial business case, this interlinking of which contains many fascinating features for product generation and for product design. And we have to answer how to turn our societal business case to the better, how to use this instead of just follow. And please note one important aspect of this as well. This is a pre-corona model. The corona showed us that our supply chains and many other things are strategically not well positioned in the interest of Sweden or Germany or Europe. And we need to come back to this question on how to use this mechanism in order to sustain our standard of living. This forces us to look consciously beyond technology and question strategy. As scientists and engineers, we often tend to be proud of our technology, and we use, for instance, this one or other high-tech devices, and we can name very interesting technologies, and we work on one or the other in one way or another way. But then we come to the question, what is the European value creation of this device? And we find that it is a VAT, and this is not terribly much. And we need to find a solution to this question if we want to keep prosperity for our societies, again, linking it to your sustainability and to understand the possible role of new technologies, maybe Industry 4.0 or others. How do they add for the value creation of the single inhabitant? Do we follow the right strategy, a principal argument? Let's look at an arbitrary cost distribution for a product made in Europe. You compare it to a low-wage country, and you find, of course, different areas where you can save, and these savings add up to a cost advantage for the low-wage country versus Europe. Already a long time ago, the CEO of BASF, the chemical company, said, oh, don't worry about that advantage too much. If you make one more night shift over here, you make up for that difference. So if this is the case, what is our real problem? Our real problem is this. We have to fight against political distortion, tax avoidance, and financial incentives, which are given in these places in order to bring the knowledge, the equipment, and the business over here at areas where we don't have a chance to fight against. We cannot fight this political distortion, for instance. But it makes this area poorer, and we have to be aware of what we fight against. We are not fighting against with Industry 4.0 this little cost advantage that may be high at other things. We are fighting this. And this is known on political and social level, but we avoid ethical adjustment. We allow for cloth production in India or Bangladesh under slavery conditions just to have one t-shirt more over here. Industry 4.0 has a certain area of attack in this process. So Industry 4.0 has advantages for production, for logistics, and so forth. So is Industry 4.0 to change this case for our better? We have to recognize that the same sphere is, of course, true in all parts of the world. And once it is here, it will be immediately there. maybe 1 week later, not years. So Industry 4.0 in principle is a new technology, but it does not help in this situation. You need to analyze this for yourself. Yes, we need very good technology, but our problem is not technology. What difference could ethics make? And I addressed this question briefly when we discussed the income distribution. I would propose a short exercise in human imagination. Try to think the unthinkable, and the unthinkable here means vision into the future, but also thinking that ethical is a realistic, important power. Put yourself in the year 1915, and your duty is to predict the development of a stove until 1960. You're very likely to get a rather good guess of what the stove will look like in 1960. You may miss technologies, but the function will be described. How about the laser? The laser was not existing in 1915, predicted in theory, and finally put into reality by Mayman in 1960. So unthinkable, no way to foresee this development. And you know what important influence on industrial production and processes the laser has today. How about cities? The cities in 1915, this was the first year of the war, were already partially burning. People at that time did not take this very seriously. They were keeping fighting. They did not foresee the detrimental devastation in Europe over the next decades. The millions of lives lost, the investment and money burned and so forth. And partially it was rebuilt by 1960. No way to foresee that. But based on simple ethical principles, we could have made a difference here, which would have saved these lives, would have saved these investments, would have saved our cities. So if you would have come to someone in 1915 and say, look, based on ethics, stop this war immediately, you probably would have been shot. Nevertheless, you would have been right, because the power of ethics could have avoided this big destruction. You can study that in Fall of Giants by Ken Follett. The list of companies basing their business on ethical principles towards their employees is long. You find it in every country and almost in every time. Go to 2008, Scania rebuilt its business based on ethical principles, came out top of the world after the crisis with their truck production, relocated a company and so forth, based on we do not dismiss anyone. My favorite example is this one, Otto Lilienthal. That's the man who built the first glider and flew it and had fatal incidents with that. But he was also the entrepreneur of a pressure vessel company. And in 1890, a time when the coal miners in Britain were still almost kept as slaves, he distributed his profit, 25% of his profit at the end of the year among his employees. You will find examples like this in your country. You will find them in Italy, France, wherever you go. And all these prove that based on these principles, these men and women were very successful economically and still kept their employees in a good position. Note that Ford doubled the wage of the daily wage of his workers and reduced the working time in order to run his factories. This is different from maximizing the profit. This leads quickly to a discussion of intangibles, because these measures which I just described are not immediately seen in the economics, nor can you prove them to be existent within 1 year of your company's balance. The question is, what happens if someone is dismissed? Some may argue core competence strengthened, unqualified labor not needed, profitability increased. Wonderful, we get more money. But others understand that friendliness is missing, willingness to solve difficult problems may be gone. Someone to argue and encourage his colleague may also be missing. These are things which help this process tremendously, but are intangible in form of the economic balance sheet of the company. If you don't believe it, you will not do it. If you believe it, you have a big advantage for your company. We need deeper insights why humans have a high potential for value creation. Suppose this box here to be the human. Of course, it's more complicated, but for simple reasons, take this. It has an intellectual level, it has a level of understanding and belief and of qualities. The understanding and belief level within humans often very significantly determine how they act. In the economic world, we take this as the output, the economic surface in which we want to consider when we talk about the humans. Intellectual, the scientific, the technological, how can we control, how is dominance realized? We usually do not consider this very much. We do to some extent, but basically our point of output is here. And it leads to systems that enhance human capabilities for making. So we reduce the human to a triggered function and a cost factor. If we shift this point of output towards more conscious, the intuition, his endurance, his identification, make use of his education and ethical beliefs, then we are likely to create systems that enhance human ingenuity. And we tap the human potential for economic value creation in a different form. We need to think this through. Research is needed for that. A new outlook on humans requested, and it will lead to new forms of value creation. And I firmly believe this is not utopia. If we jump to a key result of the So Smart project, and this links again directly to your effort on sustainability. The finding of the project, based on interviews of 1,000 people throughout Europe and checking with 9 companies, we found if you have a situation where your social care and the work life of your employees is kind of taken care of, you have ergonomic environment and, you find that this has not a significant influence on your success in terms of economic success, or it does not really impact your economic success. So it is nice to have technology, yes, but you need to go beyond that. You need at least to realize a loyalty of your workforce and that your employees identify themselves with the enterprise. Then you have an economic success above your competitor. Same is true if you work on a mission and you communicate that well and include the learning for your employees to work up to that mission. The impact on your economic success is increasingly higher. If you work on a sustainability strategy, have accordingly leadership and in place, and link this to the workplace, you have both economic success and economic impact increased. So we are not talking about, oh, this is a nice behavior of the company. No, they increase their economic success. And we have developed a method to monitor these dimensions and develop them further. This is well beyond Industry 4.0 as a technology, because this leads to questions well beyond technology. My assessment of Industry 4.0 and the transition may sound negative. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this world is changing not only in terms of transition of big enterprises, but it hits the next generation in a very interesting form. Jeremy Rifkin has written this book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, and within it, he argues that the next generation has many, many options of working together, forming networks, and they have technologies available like 3D printing, like generating their own electricity, uh, um, like printing their own books without the big publishing houses. So there are many technologies around which can be used by the individual to create and improve his economic situation. He sees, therefore, the collaborative commons as the big hope for the future, people doing things together, owning things together, sharing what is necessary, and this will counteract huge existing enterprises. And if you look through the world at the moment and you see the upheaval at different places in the world, you see that people are really willing to do things together, even if the obstacles are, if this is working against dictatorship. It is worth noting that Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in Economy, the first woman ever on commons, working on commons. And Rifkin argues that the next generation has already started this with activities like couch sharing, car sharing, and so forth. And couch sharing has already today more beds per night than the big hotel chains in the world. So this is looking for new ways of value creation and including as opposed to excluding others. This is not just stupid talk, because there are villages in Switzerland which have worked on that principle for 500 years. They managed their farm ground together and still kept as single farmers economical successful. And this was changed over time, but it is still operating today. You might be tempted to say, oh, this is far too big for me, leave me alone. I have technology to develop which is complex enough. I cannot worry about these boundary conditions. My plea is be informed and then decide for yourself. I'm convinced that you cannot stay outside. I've seen many technical developments being not put into operation because someone did not dare to invest on the necessary production equipment. The boundary conditions for the technology for Industry 4.0 are you need to say how to replace legacy systems and how this small company around the corner of your office has a chance to pay for the software necessary for running an Industry 4.0 enterprise. So we need to take care of that. It will happen to a certain extent, but please be realistic on the time scale and where it will happen. We have seen tremendous changes in the communist world. Therefore, I'm convinced, I was born in East Germany and I've seen the wall coming down, that even difficult situations can change. And you have the example in your own country that one person, what one person can do in opposition of all the rest of the world. We are setting sails into the future. Whom do we take aboard? Industry 4.0 is a beginning of a transition, and we need to decide our strategy for that transition. I would argue you need all these, and scientists and or engineers are very likely to argue, why do we need historians, or why do we need artists or theologians? I think we have to become aware of the fact that all of them have a picture of reality which can help us to shape this strategy and way forward. And I think it is a good sign that you are in your seminar trying to broaden the approach for the strategy. We need a new course and a new strategy, and research is the place to start this transition. This is more than working on a software problem for a certain device, which we hope that can be used in Industry 4.0. I've tried to find an example for the end that shows that we need to think beyond the technical detail. In many corporations with other companies or academic institutions, in my professional life, I've come across the problem that engineers tend to work on their specific side of the problem and do not take it into consideration, take the boundary conditions into consideration. You know what this is? This is the inside view of a valve of a combustion engine. The question you should ask for your answer for yourself is, suppose you have an ingenious idea for a valve of a combustion engine. Would you work on it? Will you take the courage to balance all details and system aspects, all forms of energy generation, all forms of materials that are necessary? You may not work on it because you argue that the electric engine is the future. But what if your valve reduces the fuel consumption to 1.5 liters for a 1,000 kilo car, 400 kilometers? You will need to think beyond the simple, not simple, but the single valve. And this is the picture for all things you're doing. Towards the end, I thank you for the attention. I've tried to show you that mere technical transition needs to be viewed critically, and we need to take the advantage of it for employing more people, not for profit maximization. And the means for that are available. It is not that we make people poor. Look at Germany. The car industry has paid 50 billion euros in punishment for cheating with the diesel. 50 billion. With this, they could have bought a house for each of their employees. So the means to generate new systems which create value on a more broader scale and to be successful are available. And we need to check and understand that ethics is a lever in that game. And with this, I would like to thank you and leave you for your work.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. It is very interesting approach, I think. So I hope is there any question? So I could not find any question in the chat, but maybe you can ask directly.
Yeah, this is Martin Thorngren, if I may start.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this human-centered perspective. You mentioned, you said research is the place to start. I was thinking about that. You addressed ethics and complex questions. And I think in many cases, when we talk about Industry 4.0, anything from cybersecurity and so on, there's a lack of awareness in management decision makers. And I wonder, how do you see, doesn't education play a very important role in this, and perhaps in continued education? How do we sort of, beyond research, spread awareness of these topics?
I will give you two arguments for that. Education is a place to start, because the engineers that will go away from your institutions will be in companies employed, and they will be in their lifetime confronted with the question to kick out this or to keep him or to change this. And they need the information how to handle the situation and how to understand that the given economic argument needs to be checked very carefully. It is easily to be say our balance requests that, and there is an economic necessity. If you look at the income distribution curve, you will see that there is room for keeping as opposed to room for laying off. And this starts with education, and it starts with the with implanting or to starting to understand the ethics behind and acting accordingly. Yes, this starts with education. If I say that research is a place to start, research has the big opportunity to bring economics and technology in conjunction. Try and calculate models that lead to more employment and to a broader keeping of people, as opposed to we give everything to Asia. So yes, I think research is a place to start, and researchers coming off your institution should know this context so that they have a chance to act accordingly. Once they are in industry, this system in industry is non-democratic. I have to say it bluntly as it is. So they will not be able to speak up at every place and every occasion, but they need the conviction inside that they can do something for their colleague, maybe even their father or their cousin or their neighbor, by knowing the context of value creation and that there are different forms possible.
Thank you, Christoph.
Perhaps I can continue, Monica here. And thanks, Christoph, for a fantastic presentation. I think you brought up so many different aspects and perspectives, opening up from the traditional kind of presentations and views on Industry 4.0. And I mean, we know that this coming spring is 10 years ago since Merkel launched Industry 4.0 on Hanover Messe, and there's a lot of things happening after that. But you brought up other views on Industry 4.0, and besides that, I think that there's so many things to think about. Like you mentioned, Ford, for example, often underestimated. Henry Ford was extremely innovative in many ways, and very much a transforming person who not only transformed the business but made transformation possible for the people on a international level. I'm thinking a lot of different things. Actually, you're inspiring. It would be great to have like a think tank on these kind of more broader perspectives on manufacturing and on industry development and the transformation we're in right now. When we look at the sustainability, that's what we need to focus so much going for the 1.5 degrees actually target. How do we fix that, basically? But I'm thinking one concrete question. I think that there's so much brownfield. We have a brownfield situation and not so much a greenfield where we build new factories and starting completely new and fresh with a white paper. How do you see this transformation come true based on the that we actually have so much invested already in assets, in factories, in etc.? Because I think that we very much focus on we think that we're starting with a greenfield many times, but we don't. So what's your perspective on this greenfield, brownfield, thoughts on the industry transformation?
I will give you an interesting example for the brownfield. I would say probably 10 years ago, Festo decided to build a new factory just a few miles away from our headquarters in the other village. And the factory was designed, and then suddenly they found out, oh, we have old equipment over there and we need to move it. At the time, we were able to join forces with Siemens, that had at the time a department that was doing exactly what you described, looking into, do we create a brownfield or a greenfield solution in a given place in the world? So they are operating for Siemens themselves. And I knew someone who had a good link to that department, and I asked him, could you do this for us as well, this check? And it was agreed that they came, and what they did was very interesting. They had these flying, what do you call them? Kind of helicopters with camera. You have a special name for it. You can fly them indoor, outdoor, and they have a camera.
You mean drones?
Yeah,
Drones.
drone, but there's another way of that. But let's stick with drone. They had a camera that flew through our production site internally, and within a few days they produced 3D printed models of all machines that were in there. And then they had a large room, where they modeled the existing production site, and then started to discuss with technicians, with engineers, with service personnel, and so forth, how to rearrange that. So they made use of the technology that is available for many purposes, and they came up with an interesting new design for what kind of was a greenfield, but a mixture of green and brownfield approach. The question to which it boils down at the end is, how does the new technology improve the value creation situation? Do we have the courage to try that? And then you may find that some of the old equipment is not necessary or cannot be used anymore. So Scania moved some of its factory back to Södertälje, relocated, and their production afterwards was looking completely different from what it was before, even though Södertälje was existing. So there is a mixture in between, but at first you need to understand what is the old equipment able to do. Can it generate value or profit, and what is our expectation for the profit? If the expectation for the profit is too high, forget any of these discussions, brownfield or greenfield. If you take Swatch as an example, Swatch was founded to produce a Swiss watch again. So at the time, the all watch industry went far east, and Switzerland, the Swiss Institute of Watches in Geneva, came up with a design for a mechanical watch with half the number of parts that had been used before, with the same precision. And then Hayek decided to build this watch. When he started his production line, he was the numbers are not completely correct, but in principle give the correct image. He produced the watch for 65 francs and sold it for 69. And after working on his production lines for a number of years, the price for the production was down to say 5 francs, and the price was still 69 francs. So the transition needs the courage of the people involved and needs the vision that this is possible. And then you can try to answer brownfield or greenfield.
Thanks. Great, insightful answer. Thank you, Christoph.
Yes, so now we already passed the seminar time, so I think we can finalize our seminar. Thank you, Christoph, again. So I hope everyone enjoyed this seminars, and I also share the link again in the chat, so to make better our seminar series. So please check the link in the chat. So thank you again, everyone, and I hope everyone stay safe and yeah, have a nice Friday.
Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.